Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm Lora Rolling and this is part 5 of the Hearts Galore ornament tutorial. This is the Hearts Galore ornament. So cute with all the hearts. And today we're going to be putting all of the units together. We're going to put the cap on, we're going to create the cap, and we're also going to add the ribbon. We only have a few materials to get listed, so let's get them ready and then we can get started. Let's go. Okay, so we have all 20 of our units. If you haven't completed your 20 units yet, then you'll want to watch part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4, and I have those linked down below in the description, so go ahead and go do those first, and then you'll come back to this one, which is part 5. Alrighty, so we're going to put all of these units together. So we're going to also do the cap. So we're going to use our Miyuki Delica in opaque black, silver lined red, and silver lined gold. And we're going to need a beading needle and some beading thread. The thread that I like to use is the Eslon Fire in the color crystal, and I like the 4-pound. You can use 6-pound also, or whatever your favorite beading thread is, as long as it's not too thick. Over 6 pounds would be too thick. And then I like to use the size 10 beading needle. You can use a size 12 if you prefer. I also use a couple of implements. I like to use my long nose pliers to hold on to my thread at the end while I'm cutting it, and I cut my thread with wire cutters. You can also use scissors if you'd like. And then we are also going to be using a 2.36 inch plastic crafting ornament, and I find these at my local hobby store. In a 12-pack you only need one. So we'll also be needing a ribbon. This is a 1/2 inch ribbon in width, and it's about 12 inches of ribbon. So go ahead and gather those materials and then we can get started. So I have threaded my needle with 4.5 feet of thread, and we're going to pick up our first unit, making sure that there are no connector beads on the left, but there are connector beads on the right. We're going to hide our thread by adding it to this upper section right here. So I'm just going to hide my thread by sewing up a random bead and then down the bead right next to that one. And then I'm going to pull my thread until I get about that much of a tail, just a little bitty tail. And now I'm going to zigzag by sewing back up the next bead. Now I'm going to pull until that tail disappears. And now I'm going to sew up 2 beads, 1 and 2, gently pulling. Don't tug too much or your tail will just come right out, but just making sure that the thread is hidden. Now I'm going to zigzag again. I'm coming out of this bead. I'm going to go down the next bead and up the bead right next to that. Oh, and I caught the one above that one too, but that's okay. So now we can tug it and it's nice and secure. Now what we're going to do is we're going to sew up all of these beads up through the top bead, the corner bead, and then we're going to sew down 2 beads, and I will meet you right here. Okay, so now our thread is coming out this second bead right here, and we're going to add our next unit. making sure that the big heart unit has no connector beads on the left, but there are connector beads on the right. We're going to attach the side that has no connector beads, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to sew down this second sticky outy bead. So if you see, we've got our corner bead and then one little sticky outy right next to it. We're going to sew down the second sticky outy bead. Then we're going to sew on our first unit the next sticky outy bead, being very careful not to crisscross our threads at all. Now we're going to sew on the second unit the next sticky outy, and sewing through the first unit the next sticky outy. And you'll notice it's kind of like shoelaces. We're just zigzagging, and we're going to connect these by pulling that zigzag, and you'll see that it connects perfectly. Okay, we're going to continue that zigzag all the way down until you get to this corner bead on the second unit that we just put on. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew up the next two beads so that our thread is coming out of this first sticky outy. Now we're going to grab our third big heart unit, making sure that there are no beads on the left and there are connector beads on the right. If you notice that they're on the wrong sides, just flip it over, okay? And so now we're going to attach this one. We're going to sew through that second sticky outy on the third unit. And we're going to zigzag just like we did the first two units. And we're going to zigzag all the way up until we get to this corner bead right here. And I'll meet you there. Okay, now we are coming out of this corner bead on the third unit. We're going to sew through one bead, and that will put us in position to add our first low and little triangle. This is the second triangle that we made. And so you'll notice that the connector beads are on the bottom. So we're going to grab the first sticky outy, and we're going to zigzag all the way down until we get to, on the bigger unit, this corner bead, and you can go ahead and sew down these two beads coming out of the first sticky outy. So go ahead and zip it on up, and I will meet you right here. Okay, so now we are coming out of this first sticky outy. We're going to add our fourth big heart, and we're going to sew down the second sticky outy on the fourth big heart. And then of course we're going to zigzag all the way down until we have zipped it on up, and we're going to end coming out the corner, the bottom corner of the newest unit that we just put on, and then go ahead and sew down these next two beads, and I will meet you right here. Okay, so now we're coming out of this second bead, which is the first sticky outy on this side, on the big unit. We're going to add our fifth and final big heart, making sure that the connector beads are only on the right hand side. So we're connecting to the left that does not have connector beads. We're going to skip the point, skip that first sticky outie. We're going to sew into the second sticky outie. Then sew through the second sticky outie on the big unit, and go ahead and zip it on up, and I'll meet you right here. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner of the fifth big heart, and we're going to sew through the next bead. If it'll let me, there we go. And now we're coming out of this first bead, and we're going to add our second low and little, making sure that our connector beads are on the right hand side. We do know that we have connector beads at the bottom. Our connector beads should be on the right hand side, and the biggest half heart should be on the right hand side. So knowing that it's in position, we're going to sew through this first sticky outie, and then we can sew through the second sticky outie on the big unit. And go ahead and zip this all the way up, and then we'll finish in this corner right here on the big unit. You can sew down the next two if you want to meet me right here. Okay, so I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this first sticky outie. We now get to connect our fifth and first big hearts. So sewing through, we're going to skip the top, skip that first one, and sew through the second sticky outie, just like that. And we're going to zigzag all the way down, zipping it on up, which is my very favorite part of this entire project, is the zip up. I don't know what it is. It's just so satisfying, isn't it? I love it. So zip it on up, and then we're going to come out of this bead, which is the tip corner bead of the fifth big heart unit. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead, and we're going to sew in a circle attaching all 5 corner beads. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then we're going to do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we're going to sew through 4 more. 1, oops, I just hit my camera, sorry about that. 2, 3, and 4. And now we're going to sew up the bead right next to that 4th corner bead, following our thread path, and we're going to sew down the bead right above that one. I know it's a little hard to see with the black, but the ornament turns out so cool. So okay, so now we're just going to choose any random bead until you hide your thread until you get to this bead right here. And it's the first sticky outie that we had started with. Okay, so I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this bead. We're going to sew up the bead right next to it. And also sew up through the corner bead. And then sew through the bead right next to it. Now we're ready to put on our next low and little, making sure that the big half heart is on the right hand side. We're going to sew through the first sticky outie, and then of course we're going to zigzag back and forth until we get to this corner bead right here, and I will meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew up the next two beads, getting our thread in position to add our first two above square. That's where this triangle is going to meet this triangle, right? So in order to do that, we're going to sew through that second sticky outie on the two above triangle, this one right here. And then of course we're going to zigzag all the way until we get to the very top, and we're going to come out of this corner bead right here. Okay, so go ahead and zip it on up and I'll meet you at that corner. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew up the next bead. And now we are in position to add our first top tier triangle. So the two hearts that are up above are going to be on the right hand side, and you'll also notice that all your connector beads are on the right hand side as well. They're also on the bottom, but there's no connector beads on the left side, so that's how you know that it's in the right position. So now we're going to catch our very first sticky outie on the top tier, and we're going to zigzag all the way down until you reach this corner on the big unit that has all the units we've already sewn on. Okay, so I'll meet you right there. Now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew down the next two beads. So now we're coming out of our first sticky outie, and we get to add one of our low and littles. Okay, that's the one that has the big half heart on the right hand side. So we're going to catch this second sticky outie, and zigzag your way all the way down until you reach this corner on the big unit, and I'll meet you there. So we're coming out of this bottom corner bead, and we're going to sew through all 5 corner beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then sew through 3 more beads. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, now we're going to sew up the bead right above the bead that we're coming out of. And then we're going to sew up the first sticky outie, and we're going to do our zigzag all the way up until we get to this point right here, and I'll meet you there. So now we're coming out of this corner bead, and we're going to add our next 2 above. So let's put our thread in position by sewing through the next 2 beads, coming out of that first sticky outie, and now we're ready to sew through the second sticky outie in the newest unit, and then zigzag all the way up until we get to this top corner bead right here, and I'll meet you there. So now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew through the next bead, and now we are in position to add our next top tier. So making sure that the hearts that are on the right hand side are the highest up hearts. That's how you know you're in the right position. Let's catch this first sticky outie and zigzag our way all the way up until we get to this corner bead right here. So now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew down the next 2 beads. And now we can connect this side. So this is the low and little that's already on our big unit, and we're just going to catch that second sticky outie and zigzag your way all the way down until you get to this corner bead right here. So now we're coming out of this bead. Let's sew all the corner beads in a circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'll sew through one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now just sew through 3 beads. 1, 2, and 3. Alrighty, now we're going to sew through the bead right above that one, and then choose whatever beads you want to sew through, hiding your thread all the way up until you end in this corner bead right here, and I'll meet you there. So now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew up the next 2 beads. Coming out of that first sticky outie. And now we're ready to put on another 2 above triangle. So we're going to catch this second sticky outie, and then zigzag your way up, all the way up. Let's see, we're gonna go through this one. Okay, and zigzag your way all the way up until you get to this top corner on the new unit that we just put on. And I will meet you there. So now we're coming out of this corner bead. We're going to sew down the next bead. And now we are in position to add our next top tier. Making sure the two highest ones are on the right. We're going to sew through that first sticky outie. And the next. And the next, sewing through until you get, zipping it on up until you get to this corner bead right here. And I'll see you there. So we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew through the next two beads. And now we are in position to add our last low and little. And so we're going to make sure that the bigger half one is on the right hand side. We're going to catch that second sticky outie bead and zigzag your way all the way down until you're coming out of this corner bead right here on the big unit. So now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's do the circle of 5 beads again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 corners, all zipped up into a little circle. And let's do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Was I off camera the whole time I was doing that? I'm sorry. Okay, and so through 3 more. 1, 2, and 3. It is so hard to stay in camera as this gets bigger and bigger. I guess I could widen out my camera, but then you wouldn't be able to see the beads. So, okay, let's sew up through that next bead, tighten up our circle by pulling on the thread. And now we're going to zip up this side, just zigzagging through each one. Do your zip up, and then I will meet you at this corner bead. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew up the next 2 beads. And now we are ready to add another 2 above. So making sure that the 2 hearts are above. That's why it's called 2 above. 2 hearts above. And we're going to catch this second bead right here. The second sticky outie. And then we get to zip it up until we get to this corner bead right here. And I will meet you there. Okay, so we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew up through the next bead. And now we can add another top tier, making sure that the 2 highest hearts are on the right. Let's sew through this first sticky outie. And the next sticky outie on the big unit and zigzag our way all the way until we reach the corner on the big unit, not on the top tier that we just added, but on the big unit. Okay? Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's sew up the next 2 beads. And now we're ready to connect this triangle that's already on the unit. So let's sew through the second sticky outie. And zip it on up until you reach this corner right here. You guessed it, we are going to tighten up all 5 of these corner beads. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we're going to sew through 3 more. 1, 2, and 3. Tighten up our circle. Sew through the bead right above the bead that we're coming out of. And now we're going to sew all the way across until we end up coming out of this corner bead right here. So coming out of this corner bead, we're going to sew up the next 2 beads. 1 and 2, getting us in position to add our last 2 above triangle. So we're going to catch this second sticky outie and zigzag our way up until we reach this corner right here, and I will meet you there. So now we're coming out of this corner bead right here. Let's sew through the next bead, and we are in position to put our final triangle on. This is a top tier, making sure that our hearts are up high on the right. We're going to sew through the first sticky outie bead, and then we're going to zigzag all the way down until we get to this corner bead right here. See if I can make it through. There we go. Right there, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner. We're going to sew down the next 2. And before we zip it up, we want to add the ornament. So slip the ornament right in. And if you zip it up before you put the ornament in, the ornament will not fit. So you definitely want to put your ornament in now. And so now we are coming out of this first sticky outie. We're going to sew through the second sticky outie, and then we're going to zigzag our way all the way down until we get to this corner point right here. Okay, so now we get to tighten up our circle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then go around again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and tug it nice and tight. And now what we're going to do is we're going to just sew up. You can catch the next bead right above the bead that you're coming out of, and then just hide your thread until you get to this corner point right here, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead, and we're going to zip up all 5 in the circle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then sew up 2 beads. 1, 2. Okay, now you'll notice that this ornament fits perfectly, right? But once we get to sewing close to the cap, it's kind of going to get in our way. So what we can do is we can move it over to the side, and we can pull out the actual cap. Okay, so it's so much easier to sew with this little guy instead of having to sew around the ridges and everything. So I always pull out the cap. You can keep it on if you want to, but I just think it's easier. Alrighty, so we're coming out of this bead. We're going to sew up the bead right next to it, and then we're going to sew all the way up. Oh wait, sew up the next one. Now we're going to zip it all the way up until we get to this bead right here, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we are coming out of this bead, and you'll notice there's a little bit of a space in between. So we're going to sew down the next bead, connecting those 2 beads. Then we're going to sew down the bead right under that one, and then we're going to sew up the bead right next to that one, and then we're going to sew up this last bead in the row. This is following the thread path, so now we can start sewing on this row. So sew down 1 bead, sew down the red bead. Oops, I'm getting caught. Sew up the bead next to that, sew up the second to the last bead, and sew down the corner bead. Now we are in position to zip up this and then do our circle. So let's catch that first sticky outie, and then the next one, zigzagging all the way down until we get to this bead right here, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're going to zip up this circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're going to do 3. 1, 2, and 3. Pull tight, and now we're going to sew through the next bead, and we're going to zigzag hiding our thread until we get to this bead right here, and I'll meet you there. So now we're coming out of this bead. Let's zip up our circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Make sure it's tight. At this point, I always put my cap in place because there's like a little slot that it will fit in. So, and I just hold it there. And so now I'm going to zigzag by sewing up the next bead. Oh, no. Don't want to do that. We want to follow the thread path. The next bead above where we're coming out of, and the first sticky outie. I almost got ahead of myself. And the next sticky outie. And zip it all the way up until we get to this bead right here. And I'll meet you there. Okay, so now we're up at the top and we have this little space right here. So we're going to sew down and cinch up that space. Sew down the one right below it. Sew up the one right beside that one. And then sew up the last bead in this row. Now we are in position to move over to this row. So down, down the red bead, up the bead next to that, up the black bead, and down the last bead in the row. And now we are ready to zigzag down here. So through the first sticky outie and then the next, and do your zigzag until you reach this corner bead right here. Okay, so now we're coming out of this corner bead. Let's zip up our circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, and 5, and then let's sew through 3 more. 1, 2, and 3. Alrighty, let's sew through the bead right next to that bead. And then we're going to zigzag all the way, just hiding our thread until we reach this bead right here. And this will be the last circle that we have to zip up. Okay, so now we get to zip up this circle. Coming out of this bead, we're going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then do it again. 1, 2, 3, to hide my knot, 3, and I just lost my needle, but do 4, 5, and then zip it on up until you reach right here, and I will meet you there. I'm going to add some more thread. Okay, so now we are coming out of this bead, and we have that little space, so we just need to cinch up that space, and I'm just going to sew down the next bead and down the next bead, and then I'm going to zigzag up the bead next to that one, down the bead next to that one, and then I'm going to do that again. I'm going to go down 2 beads, 1 and 2, and then I'm going to zigzag again. I'm going to go up the bead right next to that one and down the bead next to that one. And that should be nice and secure. I'm going to cut my thread, but before I cut my thread, I always take a look around and make sure that I have cinched up all the circles. And it looks like we got to all of them. And I'm not sure if you've noticed or not, but when we use these plastic bulbs underneath, and not only does it make the perfect ornament shape, right, but you can see through them. And so when the light reflects through the bulb, it reflects right through and it makes it like extra sparkly. It's so pretty in real life. I can't wait for you to have your own. Yeah, and I can't wait to hear all the comments about all of them that you've made. So I really hope you're enjoying this. Okay, I'm going to cut my thread because I've made sure that all of my circles are combined. So I'm lifting up my thread with my needle nose pliers, or my long nose pliers, and I'm just going to get as close to the bead as possible with my wire cutters or your scissors, and I'm going to snip it. Just make sure that you don't snip a bead. Okay, so now we can add our cap back on. I'm going to pinch these 2 little guys, and it snaps right back on like that. Now we get to make the cap. So I will be right back and we will be able to make it. Okay, so now we get to make the cap. So let's thread our needle with 2 feet of thread, and then pick up 40 gold beads. Okay, we're going to sew through the first bead that we put on and pull through, and it makes a circle. So now we're going to leave about a 6-inch tail. So a little bit longer. There we go. We got about 6 inches there. And then we're going to pick up 1 gold bead, and we're coming out of this bead, we're going to skip the bead right next to it, and we're going to sew through the next. Then we're going to do the same thing again. Pick up 1 gold bead. Coming out of this bead, we're going to skip the bead right next to it and sew through the next. Then one more time, we're going to pick up a gold bead. Coming out of this bead, we're going to skip the next bead and sew through the one right after that. And the more you put on, the easier it will be for you to see that it starts to make this 2 in 1, 2 in 1. See that? It's a little pattern. Okay, so pick up 1 more gold bead, coming out of this bead, skip this bead, and sew through the next. And we're going to do this all the way around until we have picked up 20 beads, and I will meet you at the 20th one. Okay, so I picked up my 20th gold bead. I'm coming out of this bead, I'm going to skip this one, and then I'm going to sew through the next, but I'm also going to sew through the one in front of that too. So we're stepping up by sewing through 2 beads. Okay, now we should have what looks like this. Now this is going to fit right on top of the cap with a little effort. Just kind of wiggle it until it slides down to fit. And once it does fit, you've got a little leeway because you haven't tied it off or anything. So you can pull on the tail and the long thread and tighten it up. Okay, so now I'm coming out of this bead right here. I want to actually be in a position where I'm on the top row. So I'm going to sew through the next 2 beads, making my thread come to the top row. So it's now in position to add more beads. If you shimmied your little circle of beads onto your cap and your thread is already coming out of a top bead, then you don't have to do that. That was just a happy accident, right? Okay, so now we're going to start adding red beads. Let's start with 1 red bead. We're coming out of this bead. We're going to skip the innie and sew through the outie. We're just going to do this all the way around. Pick up 1 red and sew through the next sticky outie. And keep on going all the way around until you've added 20 beads, and I will meet you at the 20th. Okay, so now I am at my 20th red bead. I'm coming out of this bead. I'm going to sew through the gold and also the first red that we put on. Okay, so stepping up, and now I'm going to pull it tight, making sure that it doesn't come off of my cap. I kind of put my finger there so that it won't slide off my cap, because we want to keep it on there. Okay, Now we're going to add 20 more beads. So one at a time, pick up one red and sew through the next. One red and sew through the next. And do that all the way around until we've added a second row of red. Oh, see, I didn't hold on to it and it fell off. So we want the second row of red, and I will meet you at the 20th. Okay, I'm at my 20th bead again. So I'm going to sew through that first one and the first one that I had put on originally. So we're stepping up. I'm going to pull it tight again. And now we get to start putting on our black beads. So we're going to do one at a time. Add a black bead and sew through the next sticky up. One black and sew through the next. One black and sew through the next. And we're just going to keep on doing that until we've got 20 black beads on, and I'll meet you there. Alrighty, ready for our 20th black bead, and I'm sewing through the next two, stepping up, pulling tight, making sure that cap doesn't come off. And now we're going to put our last row on, which is 20 black beads. So starting one by one, we'll do one black bead, sew through the next. One black bead, sew through the next. And do that until you've put 20 on. And then I will show you how I tie it off. Okay, we are ready for our last bead. One black bead, and we're going to sew through 2 beads. Officially stepping up, but not really, because we're actually going to move that position. But I wanted you to see that this in my pattern is an optional row, and it's because it's kind of a picot. It's kind of like a castle, you know, the edges of the top of a castle. So if you don't want it to be higher than the cap, then you don't have to put this second row on. I think it looks really nice with it on though. Alrighty, so now that we have all of our beads on our cap, we're going to change direction. We're coming out of this bead. We're now going to zigzag. We're going to go the opposite direction in the bead right under it. And then again, we're going to go the opposite direction, the bead right under that. And while you're sewing this, make sure you hold your cap into place. Okay, and we're going to do that again. Let's sew up 2 beads. 1, 2. And then we can zigzag. We're coming out of this bead. We'll go the opposite direction on this bead, holding our cap on. And then once again, the opposite direction on this bead. Oops, I just hit my camera. And now I'm just going to sew up 1 more bead. Oh, I sewed up 2 more beads, and now we can cut this thread. So do the same exact thing with the tail thread. You've got about 6 inches to work with, and I just take my needle off of my thread that's left over, and I just place it onto my tail, and then I do the same exact thing. And that way we have no threads showing at all. And it's nice and secure. And sewing through. Oh, I caught two that time. And it also is something that you can take on and off if you want to. I know that there are some people that like to maybe put a few beads inside the ornament, inside the bauble, and then that way it's kind of shaky. It's almost like a maraca? I don't know what those are. But yeah, and I think it's maraca. And yeah, it just makes it fun. Or you can put crystals in there and make it like a little Easter egg hunt on the Christmas tree. Or it makes it shaky if you hang them on your, like your doorknob, or your, let's see, where else would you hang it? In your car, I guess. That's not legal here in Texas to hang something off of your rear view mirror, but I know a lot of people do that. So, alrighty, so let's get the part that has the hangy, so that's the ribbon. So we have 12 inches of ribbon, and all I'm going to do with my 12 inches of ribbon is match the ends together, folding it in half. So we've got a loop side, and then we've got the ends, and then I'm going to tie the ends in a knot as elegant as I can by crossing over and pulling through and making it, you know, kind of pretty, right? And then we have this little loop side. We're going to pinch it so that it's half and half and slide it through our ornament cap, and then open it up and slide our knot right through it. And once again, trying to make it as elegant a knot as possible. I'm going to try to pull it through. And there we go. So now you have your ribbon, you have your completed ornament. Oh my gosh, I love it so much. I hope you do too. Congratulations on completing your ornament, and I will see you in a second. I have had a blast putting this ornament together with you. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Remember to like and subscribe and hit that bell button so you get notified when the next video comes up. I have a new ornament in store for you that you're just gonna love. I hope to see you there. Thanks for watching.